All right. Hello, everyone. I'd like to officially welcome you to today's webinar, Building a Professional Network for Your Service and Career. I'm Calvin Landrum with the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session, and you'll see me pop up probably in the chat and in the Q&A panel and sort of throughout this entire presentation. So, I'd like to welcome our main speaker today. Assisting me today are our partners Jessica Knight and Indy Clark from Education Northwest, who you'll also see in the chat and Q&A. But we're delighted to have with us Denise Riedman. Denise served as an AmeriCorps Vista member in 1994 and 1995 at the Denver Indian Center in Denver, Colorado. Denise is now the Director of Career Development and Alumni Services for the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University here in Washington, D.C. She also does private career coaching through her website, careerhappinesscoach.com. Denise is an active member of AmeriCorps Alums and serves as the official AmeriCorps Alums career coach. So we're so happy to have you here, Denise. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Of course, of course. All right, so let's take a look at our agenda today. So this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about, why you should build a network, what you need to know before you build that network. We're going to point you to some online resources, some offline connections, and hopefully give some long-term perspective on networking. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Denise. Take it away.
Thanks again, Calvin. I love coming and talking about this. We were actually chatting before we started here and talking about how this, to me, is one of my favorite webinars to deliver. So I am thrilled to be here. And also as a Vista alum, I shared with them that I still remember I used to make $293.16 every 2 weeks was my stipend. So I have lived and breathed this. One of the reasons I love talking about building a network is because it's often seen as this like necessary evil, like unsavory, not fun. It's just really fraught with negative terms, and I just don't think it needs to have this. So when I started to do a little research on this, I was like, oh, let me go into thesaurus and look for alternative words for networking. And honestly, what I saw reinforced why people don't like networking. I mean, the word hobnob, schmooze, rub elbows, it's like this is everything which makes people kind of cringe when I use this word. I very rarely talk to people about building a network that I don't have someone say, well, I don't really like this. I'm not good at this. So today I'm hoping that everybody listening can kind of take all of those fears and know that everybody else has them and just put it in the box, and we're going to just rethink and turn it on its head how you approach this. And hopefully the definition of networking that I found in the dictionary will help you feel more heartened, because this to me is what it's about, a supportive system of sharing. It's about being with people where there is a common interest. So let's think about this lens as we're going into the presentation today. So one of the things I really like to help people reframe is, instead of even using that word, I think about this as career capital. This is not about landing another Vista position, getting a job. To me, it is building a community of people and organizations with shared goals and interests. It's about learning your field, knowledge. It's about who could be a funder for you, who could fund your work. It's knowing, being known for your expertise. It's being on panels. So it's thinking about it from a broader, long-term perspective. And I think when you approach it from that way, it doesn't become that transactional, schmoozy kind of thing, but rather, wow, these are people who really care about the same things that I do. Let's be connected together. The research is overwhelming on this. There has been multiple peer-reviewed studies that show having an open network is the #1 predictor of career success. And this doesn't mean of landing a job. This means being in the job, because we all know this. When you think back to your life when you were really young and you had your little group of friends at school, well, you all knew each other and what was going on, but that's it. And when you have an open network, you meet new people, you get new ideas, you hear about new possibilities, you build diversity in all ways, shapes, and forms. When I know a lot of people earlier on in their career that thinking about it from the job perspective, or research supports that, over 2/3 of jobs are found through employee referrals. That was the statistic last year. So this is, and I will tell you, these statistics around the 2/3 have really stayed this way for a long time. The other thing I like to remind people is that we are actually wired based on ancient drivers in our system to live in communities. We used to live in tribes. So our brains wire us for wanting to be in this type of community. However, at the same time, we are actually wired to fear rejection because we're actually not that far evolved from Neanderthal times, our brains, and if you were rejected from a tribe, that would typically mean that you are going to be on your own. You might be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, freeze to death. You need community. So when we feel like, oh, I'm going into a networking situation or I'm going to this event, I'm not going to know people, it triggers these parts of us that fight, flight, or freeze. So I like people to understand that, because I think once you know this is part of your wiring, it doesn't make you feel like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. And again, more studies, they've actually shown, and I love this one, it always shocks people, that when you ask someone to help others for help, they actually think more highly of you. Often people say, well, I'm asking them for help, they must not think I'm competent. The reverse is true. You've actually boosted their ego. If you ask them well, they actually think more highly of you. So help, keep this in mind as we keep going forward. Okay, so this common scenario, right? You're at an event, you meet someone, you get the business card, and it's like, oh my God. Flight or freeze usually is that one. Hopefully you're not going to fight the person giving the card. Like, okay, I got their card, I'm going to run and go over and get another thing of food. Or freeze, what do I talk about? So we're going to go through some ways to help you so when in those situations, and this is just an example of these kind of situations, you feel more confident. People typically think about networking, they're like, oh, it's who you know. It's all about networking. That's what LinkedIn is, just all about that. It's knowing people. I say no. The first three things are know yourself, know your organization, and know your field. Knowing yourself is like what causes, what are your strengths? We're going to go in a little more depth. Knowing your organization. Where are you working? What's your own core mission? Who are the leaders? And then knowing the fields that you're interested in. And actually, now that I think about it, you'll probably need plural, because when we're particularly in this line of work, so many things are connected. Knowing who the hot trends are in education and environment, knowing all of this. So how do you know yourself, your organization, and your field? We're going to go back to some ABCs here. Okay, I'm not going to sing it for you. We don't need to torture you for that, but I'm going to talk about the ABCs with this. The first one is assess. I really think it's important to assess and know yourself. You're not somebody else, and particularly I find early on in the career, we live in the world of shoulds. We always say we have to stop shoulding on ourselves, because that's what we do. Oh, I should be like this person. I should be more extroverted. I should be more comfortable. It's knowing who you are and what your strengths are and finding a way to tell your story that are your gifts, no one else's. It's not about being bragging and arrogant. It's knowing what it is about you. So I'm a fan of people taking assessments like Strength Finders, which is Gallup, the VIA Character Assessment, which you can actually do for free, MBTI, a lot of people do, True Colors, anything that you can do to get a sense of who you are. The next one I talk to people about is the B's, is be aware. Notice what things get your interest, what events you go to. I was at an event just last night, and I was there, and I often, if I'm not sure if I'm going to like something or not, I sit somewhere where I can escape. And after about an hour, I escaped. I was aware I was not engaged at that event. I was on my phone. I'm like, that isn't where I want to spend my time. Notice what you're reading. If I really love an event, I am there and I am fully engaged. But as you're exploring this, be prepared to notice what emails are you reading, who do you want to talk to. And then the last one I talk about is converse. You can't sometimes think your way into all of this and getting the answers. You need to talk to people. Be aware when you're doing maybe, and we'll talk more about this, like informational meetings, people you talk to that you're like, oh my gosh, I could talk to them all day, and other people you might think you want to talk to them, and you realize, wow, I tend to not connect with people working in this line of work or from that focus. So part of it is that, and also part of it is it's going to help you get a better sense of what the field is in a way that's easier, that you can't just read your way into these answers or think about it. So the first we have were the ABCs. So the next we're going to go into, we got the D, E, and F. So it's a good way to just, for me, to always think about it. So we did a lot of the thinking, you know, conversing, being. The second is D, is do. Again, this goes down to you can't just think your way into something, so you have to go to events. And we're going to talk a little bit further today about how to do this and not be overwhelmed, but you need to actually be out there and seeing what's going on. Second is really around educating yourself, knowing what you're following, reading things. So educate yourself and follow people. Follow people on LinkedIn, follow organizations, go to certain events with certain organizations that are really focused on things. You will never hear me recommending someone just going to a generic networking event. Go to the ones, follow the ones that are events or talks that are related to your field. And again, we're going to dig more into all of these, but we have the A, B, C, D, E, F. So then when this happens, the next time someone gives you your card, you know, gives them your card, you can actually have some type of connection. You had had a conversation. You felt a little more confident. You don't have to have all the answers. You might just know how to ask different questions so you feel more engaged. And with this, it's sometimes, particularly when people, again, are early in their careers, and I keep saying this because I know a lot of people do this early in their career, and they're like, well, I don't really have that much to be able to do for somebody. Well, it is important to know that one thing is just giving on LinkedIn, which is as simple as potentially forwarding, re-forwarding a post someone had, sending it to someone else, connecting to people. That's it. This is an amazing statistic. When you give on LinkedIn in these ways, 10 times more likely to be contacted for new opportunities through recruiters or other people because you're raising your activity on LinkedIn. Receiving, be open to receiving. And I love this study. It was, we overestimate by significant amounts that people are going to say no to us, and we greatly underestimate that they want to say yes. People want to help. And then also I feel like the big one within this is the connection. Sometimes I will just connect people that are way above my pay grade, way above my profile, that are higher profile, higher prestige, and I can connect the two of them. I actually am not going to be at that level, but by connecting them, I'm seen as a value add. So this is a good way to think about how to connect, and then to think about the stages of relationship. Contacts count research shows, and this is really interesting, 6 to 8 contact points with someone before they really know who you are. So sometimes I'll have someone, a client, a student, say to me, well, I talked to that person 2 times and then I saw them in a event, they didn't remember me. Well, in your mind, you might have really remembered them, but they might have met 10 other people that day. So not to take that personally. And then to think about the process with which you navigate and go from the outside in. Accidents or people like these chance encounters. I live in D.C., I bike to work, I take the metro. Sometimes when I'm at a flight, I end up chatting with somebody that turns out there's a connection. That's from that level. Then getting them into the acquaintance stage. This might be an acquaintance, someone that you know, you meet through someone you know, or you've seen them at an event or something and you want to be bringing them in closer. An associate might be someone who's the same organization as you. Maybe it's on a board that you're on. Maybe it's another AmeriCorps alum. You might see them part of a softball league. There's a National Service Softball League here in D.C. So you're starting to get them closer, but they're not yet in your active level. So they can all get transitioned to that, but think about, remember, 6 to 8 contacts to actually get them, keep going a little bit further in. So as you get further into that active stage, you have the advocates. These are people that might seek each other out, that might say, hey, I've got an idea for you, I have a referral for you. I was at a conference last week and I came across this person that might want to work with your organization. So these are people you have closer connections to. And then finally, your allies. I like to think of them as your board of directors. And the board of directors is these are people who, when you need advice, when you don't get a job that you want or a grant falls through, people you commiserate with, people you celebrate with when you have a win, you were asked to be on a panel, you got someone new into the community engaged, when you have an important decision to make. I like to call this a board of directors because for me what's important about that is they're people who I go to at different stages for different parts of my life. It's not just, oh, I have these, I don't love the term mentors, just I think it's a funny term, so I like to use this instead. Just different people that are kind of my advisors. So this is a good way to think about, you have people in each of these areas. Are there gaps that you want to bring people into? And how do you cultivate that, which is what we're going to talk about next. The first way we're going to talk about identifying and connecting with those people is the joy of social media. I get super overwhelmed by all of this. To be honest with you, looking at some of these symbols, I'm not even sure I know what all of these symbols are for, what different sites. You don't need to know all of them. You don't need to be active on them all the time. And for those of you sitting maybe on the phone right now thinking, oh my gosh, I can't stand this stuff, I like the in-person, we're going to get to the in-person, trust me, because that's my favorite side. But there is, in this day of social media, you have to understand how to use it because you want to be able to use it to your benefit and not have it used for you. And the reality is statistics are overwhelming. This is a 2016 result from JobBite. 87% of recruiters use LinkedIn to find and vet candidates. They use Facebook and Twitter. Those are going to be the big three. Twitter has declined a little bit in this way for using it to evaluate candidates. LinkedIn has stayed pretty consistent, and so has Facebook. I think just Twitter's just being used in different ways, more for, say, news sharing than it is for people to really position themselves as a brand. But this can all be really fluid. As we all know, these sites are constantly evolving, so how they see themselves. But recruiters use a whole backside of LinkedIn. They look for tenure at current organization, previous jobs. They use Facebook to maybe see, do I know someone through a mutual connection that I can do like an informal kind of reaching out to somebody? So how do you use these to your benefit? First, Twitter. To me, the way you can think about Twitter is to tap into its basic resources. First one is just to listen. Remember we talked about knowing what's going on in the field. Know what keywords, where are the trends in this, what is the latest news? Second one with this, again, going back to what I said, follow. Use Twitter lists to manage it because it can be a lot. This is how you can brand yourself. You know, if you go to my Twitter, it's very consistent with my coaching, my career happiness coaching brand. It's the same picture. So to have a consistent message, bio, welcome message, pretty short and sweet with this. And then the last one with Twitter is thinking about value add. Similar to what I talked about before on LinkedIn, when you repost things, same thing, retweet things, ask relevant questions, give shout outs to people. I heard of somebody a little while back that got a shout out, had put in something, a reference to a celebrity who got it, who did a shout out, way increased their book sales just by a simple shout out that they had done. Now we're not doing books here, but you can tell there's a cause that you care about that you know somebody famous is doing. You never know what's going to happen. So to me, this is how you really want to think about using Twitter. And there's also the hashtags with Twitter. There's a great resource about, you know, for finding about specific jobs in fields. And if people have some specific hashtags that they use or ways that they're using Twitter, please put this into the chat box. You know, you all, I'm sharing this presentation with you. I've been working in the field in this regard, but you all are living and breathing this right now. A lot of the people on the call are millennials, 20s and 30s, so you're maybe even more active on some of the social media. So please share your knowledge and resources. So the next one after Twitter, oh, and also the other thing with Twitter is organizations are using this to really publicize things. Pretty much very fast, quick things. And so you want to be following the right organizations with this because you can often hear about events. They might get last-minute tickets to an event that opens up to people their jobs right away. So after Twitter, we're going to Facebook. People don't use Facebook the way that I think Facebook at one point was trying to kind of position into the LinkedIn space around professional networking. I don't think it's there yet. I'm not sure with some of the changes that we're seeing with all these sites if it will go into that space. regardless, it is important to know that someone can look at Twitter. We hear all of those really horror stories about people losing jobs or people putting something on their Facebook that can hurt them professionally. So be aware about the status updates you're doing. You can customize your URL to make sure it's professional. Making sure your photos are on there. Take some photos off if they're not appropriate. I know it is tough because people tag you in other photos. It is your job to manage your social media profile and make sure things are on there. So this is from your own side on what's on the left here, and then what's on the right is how you can then use the resources within Facebook about liking company pages. They look for that, being aware of events and groups. This is a way that I actually see Facebook doing a lot more mobilization in the past couple years to really integrate kind of a lot of network events that are happening, and so you want to be following them. And also be really aware of your privacy settings to make sure that you are using it appropriately. Again, Facebook organizations are using it. Some organizations are more social media savvy than others about using Facebook to advertise what's going on. But if the organizations that you're interested in are doing it or your own, make sure you're following them. Okay, so the last one is the big one to me is LinkedIn for professional. As we saw, the statistic was the highest, 87% of recruiters. I've not seen this diminished. They're constantly evolving right now. So it is one of the most important ones from my perspective. We're not going to be able to go through everything on LinkedIn. So for this, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a macro level view about some things with LinkedIn. There's some amazing resources you can tap into for more information. So you want to manage your LinkedIn well. I truthfully am amazed by the number of inappropriate pictures on people's LinkedIn profiles. You know, I see pictures of people that are really far away or doing things not related at all to their career, or they're, 15 years younger than they are in their picture, and it just doesn't look right. You really want to have professional photos, and they don't need to be professionally done, but it needs to look professional. And you can have friends take it in this day and age, finding locations. Sometimes, for example, in D.C., sometimes people have a picture of the White House in the background or the Capitol building. I have people that are doing international development. They'll have pictures from them from the field that look professional. Or if you're doing environmental education, you might have yourself actually teaching. As long as it looks professional, you can have a little bit of that background view on it. You can personalize the header. A lot of people don't realize this. They will just have a default of your current job. But remember, all of this, resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, it should not be a snapshot of where you are. It should be a storytelling of who you are and where you want to go. So you can personalize that to actually reflect if you're working at a site, but that doesn't tell people what you actually want to do. You can put some words on there that talk about your area of expertise. If you're in youth development or that's where you want to go, put that language up there. Make it easy for people to find you. Again, it's a story about who you are and where you want to go, and that's critical to think about. You also can personalize, and you should, your public profile URL. So you actually have to go into LinkedIn and edit. You go into the click that says edit your public-private profile. It allows you, because a lot of them are going to have those little crazy letters on the one side. Or the numbers, you can take those off. Because I always recommend that when you're sending emails to people about setting up meetings and you're sending them not in LinkedIn but just through your email address, it's great to include your LinkedIn address at the bottom of your email. That way people can click on it and see where you are. So it's a nice way to be like, oh, they want to connect with you because you're working at that organization. Now, I am the only Denise Riedman, so it makes it easy for me to personalize it. If you have a common name, you sometimes have to use middle initial, or you might have to use a couple of numbers, but it doesn't need to be as many numbers as that. So you can play around with it till you find a combination that works for you. The one thing I would always caution, sometimes people will put their birth year on there. I don't know why people do. Don't put like the year on there because then that dates it, but just come up with a combination of numbers. When you build your connections on LinkedIn, and if you start to get over like 100, 200 connections, it's incredible how much things open up to you. It becomes, options. You start to get first and second degree connections will start to open up. However, you always want to personalize the message. This is one of my big pet peeves when people send me a generic message, and I'm like, really? You couldn't take the 2 seconds to do this. The clicker, though, is that you want to be aware of is that when you're looking at your LinkedIn profile and you're in the network section and it makes all those suggestions and it says connect, don't hit the button from that page. I don't know why LinkedIn does that, because when you click that, it sends the generic message. What you want to do is it makes suggestions for you. Open up the person's profile in a different tab, hit connect there, then and only then will it give you the option to customize the message, and you can see how to customize it. So it makes it short and sweet to customize an invitation. If you don't hear from somebody after this first customization and you're looking to set up a networking meeting, follow up with another email via LinkedIn, or now you'll have their contact information if it's available through First Degree Connections on their site, and so you want to do this. I often tell people if you're just trying to connect with someone you don't really know, sometimes the best thing to do is to not actually connect via LinkedIn. Find their information on LinkedIn where they work, their organization. Then go to their organization's website, find their email address. If you can't find it, call the front desk, usually a Google search. Email them at their work organization. You can personalize the email address. And then after you've met with them, go back into LinkedIn and connect. You can do it either way, but you often get a higher response rate if you email someone directly. LinkedIn, just like Twitter and Facebook, great way to find out about other organizations. There's so much research you can do. Now, I have clicked, or we haven't clicked on here about if there's a premium level. I often get asked that question. You don't need to pay for the premium level. The one challenge with LinkedIn now is if you're doing a lot of searching, it will eventually tell you reach the commercial limit for that month. So one thing you might do right near the end of your service is they do usually a 1-month free premium. Well, not actually right near your service. End of service is when you start looking for work. You might end up having to pay for a month or two of premium and then just cancel it. It will kind of limit that, but using the premium does open up. You start to see more around their hiring trends. So sometimes it's worth it. I do know that it, when I remember being a Vista, you don't have a lot of extra money, so just, use that selectively. The one other thing with LinkedIn I want to just talk about is LinkedIn groups, because they can really help you get an insider glance into a field. Place to brand yourself, connect with people not in your network, hear about insider events. You'll be able to see this in your LinkedIn profile under More. For you, over in the top part of the bar, you'll see where LinkedIn groups are. So I did just get an email from them because I'm a pretty active user, and I think that they're moving things for groups to make it easily accessible. So it might, if it's not already back at the top bar, it might be easier to find groups. They've just kind of been evolving the group side of things. So within all of this, you have to know your social media footprint. Google yourself. I had a situation where I had someone quote me on their website that I had endorsed them that I had not done. I had to very nicely email this person and ask for my information taken off of there. You need to know what's up on yourself on the whole of the internet as well as on all of these sites in Facebook. So do this regularly. Put your name in parentheses. If you have a common name, you might need to put, an organization you worked with, but you want to search for this to make sure if someone else is searching for you, they're not finding something you don't want to have. Okay, so please, if there's some LinkedIn groups that you recommend, would love to add some suggestions in here. Put them in the chat panel. Make sure that you're doing it that it's open to everybody, because it would be great to have people share. Calvin, I'm just going to take a pause for a second and see if any other ideas or questions came up that I should address here before we keep going, if there was any suggestions of some other groups.
Yeah, so I guess while we're waiting for some, if anyone has any other groups, please go ahead and place them in the chat. I would like to call back a little bit. I think we had some interesting conversation, going on in the chat box that I'd like to get your take on. Someone asked, if your Facebook, is private or non-public, can that still, be counted against you? If someone has to, do a lot of digging to, kind of get to your, personal page, like an employer possibly, do you think
I don't think so. I think Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. I would, if you can make it totally private. I mean, sometimes people can still access it through some digging, but you know, I would still be aware of your profile, and particularly in this day and age with some of the political things. Like if you're looking to work in a nonpartisan organization and maybe even posting some things politically, you do need to be aware of that. Someone could find it. I don't think it counts against you if you keep it private, because I think a lot of people at employers and in HR understand that people try to keep Facebook more private and away from their professional personage.
Totally, and I think it would be, you know, maybe more about the effort to hide it. You know, I think if people are looking at your Facebook, they're worried about things that are public, you know, and things that could maybe reflect poorly on the organization. So if there's nothing there, you know, that anyone could see, then like, you know, maybe you're okay.
Yeah. Anything else that came up? Yeah.
Yeah, I do see someone said students and recent grads. Thanks, Sergio. I think that is, I think that's a LinkedIn group. There is an AmeriCorps Vista LinkedIn group that you all can join. We do post, you know, CNCS positions there. We post things about, you know, so we post things about their career fairs that Vista holds, all that stuff. Idealist is one that I put in there. You know, they have lots of nonprofit jobs and things like that. So, yeah.
Great. Okay. Anything else before we move and take this offline and into meeting people in person, which is my favorite?
Same. I think I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yes, I'm ready too. Despite last night leaving a networking event, which is actually fine, so taking it offline. So let's talk about how to manage this. First thing, smart event going. Choose wisely. There is limited time, limited energy. I'm sure, like all of you, sometimes you just feel overwhelmed by all these different things. Oh, go to this event, go to that event. And choose wisely. Know if you're going because, again, you're shoulding on yourself. Oh, I should be there, when you really just want to go home and, like, binge watch Game of Thrones. You know, think about, make sure you're managing your energy well with this stuff. As you said, as I was saying earlier, I don't like people going to just generic networking events. I find that it just isn't very comfortable. Go with others. Particularly, you know, when you're newer to it and if you feel more uncomfortable. But you don't want to stay with them. You want to be able to break up, but it's, you know, and go to different places. But if you're feeling uncomfortable, there are people you can go back to. It's a sense of support. It helps build your confidence. As I wrote, arrive early, leave early. Sometimes you end up doing that, or arrive late and stay late if you can't get to something. So, for example, in D.C., and I'm sure in a lot of cities across the country, nonprofits, think tanks will do breakfast talks. I love them. I'm a morning person. So there are some in the area where I can't stay for the whole talk, but like the Urban Institute near us, great breakfast, which as a National Service member, you should always take advantage of things that are free. I think I'm always a National Service member at heart, so I go to anything with free food. I'll go from like 8:30 to 9 for the networking, connect with people. Then I might be able to only stay for the first half an hour, 45 minutes of an hour and a half talk. I'll sit in the back so I'm not disrupting the group, and I leave. If it's something I'm really interested in, or if it's a kind of environment where I can't leave or I shouldn't leave or I want to stay, I'll choose differently. But be aware that that is very common and it is fine as long as it's done in a respectful way. Or also, you know, like last night when I was at an event that just, it was not a hard event for me to just sneak out of. It just didn't feel right, and I wanted to be selective with my time. So if you can't get to an event and the networking's afterwards, go to the last part of the talk. I'm really a fan of things when you go to things that are a talk, a presentation, because then when you're at an event afterwards or before around the networking, you can say to someone, what brings you here? How is your work connected to this? Easy ways to build relationships. If you're going to a conference and there is like a speaker you want to connect with, what I tell people is either be the first one in line or the last one in line, usually. There's pros and cons to all of this. If you're first in line, you know there's going to be a big line after you, but the person's really fresh. If you're last in line, the person might be wrapping up that you can walk out with them. I actually presented once at a national service event. The guy waited to the end, young AmeriCorps member, really had some questions. He actually helped me carry my stuff to the car. It was so sweet, and he was very genuine with wanting to connect, and so I really appreciated the way he approached that. The challenge is anywhere in the line is you're going to have people behind you when it's a big speaker. So you always want to be careful and just say to someone, I really enjoyed hearing about this. Could I follow up and connect with you? So think about it as a, like I said, is a teaser conversation. any of these events. If you're talking to somebody and you're at a networking event, and an easy way to get out of it and to make that a teaser event is I might say, Calvin, I was talking to you and say, Calvin, I am sure that there's a lot of people here you want to connect with. It was great hearing about your work at the corporation. Can I get back in touch and we end up having coffee at some point? I would love to hear more about your work. So you're showing him that I'm respecting who he is, that he has other people to talk to. It allows me to not get trapped in a conversation, and it gives me an opening to follow up afterwards. So easy little things to make it not feel as stressful. Here's some things when you're in that process. One of them is the traffic light strategy that was actually shared by the NPR radio host Marty Nemko, and I loved this. And it's a really easy way to think about it when you're in like a networking thing. It's like, oh my gosh, what do I say to the person? You have that first 20 seconds at your green light. You are just, they're liking you. You haven't said anything, hopefully, that's gotten them feeling uncomfortable. 20 seconds, okay? Hopefully in service of the person. Next 20 seconds, you could potentially lose their interest or they could think you're long-winded. So, you know, you don't want to be going on and on about who you are. I don't love the word elevator pitch at all. I think you need to know your story and your message, because elevator pitch to me seems like you're throwing a fast, hard ball at somebody. I want to have something that feels more organic and fluid. So when you're in that 20 seconds talking, it can be really short. Give them a hook with something, because then the last thing is your light is red. You know, sometimes the person's really engaged, connecting with you. You feel that. You might be able to have a longer yellow light, but be aware, notice them. You can usually notice their eyes might be wandering. They just might not be as engaged with you. It might also have nothing to do with you, so don't take it personally if you see the red light. They might have had a long day. They might be exhausted. They might see somebody that their boss told them they have to talk to out of the corner of their eye. So don't take it personally if you see the red light. Use it as an opportunity to be able to say, okay, I want to follow up with them afterwards. Another way, another tool that I really like on how to do this is match, shift, pass back. This is a formula I found from Annette Grant, and it just, again, helps simplify the process. And I like these little tools because I find it just helps me in these situations. So the first stage is match. You're starting to, like, make an initial connection to somebody. You can see from what's in the green there, like, oh, you know, like, great, they're both related to education and they're interested. You're making that initial match. Then you're shifting. So shifting is you're adding on to the topic, so you might be shifting gears, or you're changing topics until you find something that's a connection with. That it's what I like to call, you have a care share. I know that sounds funny, but to me what that means is you're both finding something you care about and you're sharing that connection. So you see how that shift is. Then you do the pass back to them. This is when you take it back to have conversation, further conversation. And again, this can be, you know, the red, yellow, green, or I'm sorry, I'm doing it backwards, green, yellow, red on how at the pass back you're then ending the conversation and moving on. And you're just kind of giving them a chance to feel comfortable and to know that you respect them. So would love any suggestions before we go a little bit more into conversation starters, and then we're going to have time for questions. I'm sure in all of your towns, small towns, I used to run a VISTA project in Maine, and I remember some of the events that our people in the smaller areas were going to were like little town council events, potlucks in the community, pancake breakfast. In Maine, we used to have lots of lobster bakes. You know, what other face-to-face events have you found to be really helpful to feel comfortable in this space? And it is going to vary across the country, size of town, and most of all, who you are. Remember what I said earlier in this is that this is about finding your authentic message. There are going to be some things that are going to come up here that I've talked about that are coming up in the chat. You're like, I would never do that. Person on the next computer might be like, I would love to do that. It's finding what I call person fit, you know, networking. It's what works for you. For example, if you're a very strong introvert that doesn't like networking events, you might choose to do informational meetings. You might be someone who feels very introverted who likes educational talks. So, you know, it can be, you might be, I'm extroverted, but I actually don't like large events at all. They don't work for me. So people would say, oh, you're extroverted. I'm like, that's not what I like. It's finding what works for you. So please, Put some good stuff in there, suggestions, ideas, would love to hear it, and I will be learning from all of you. Okay, so the next thing that everybody always says, oh my gosh, well, what do I do when I'm in these situations? One of my favorite things when you're having conversations with people is 3 simple words, particularly when I'm confused and I don't really know the person, I don't really know what they're doing, I don't want to sound dumb. Tell me more. So you work at that organization. Instead of saying, I don't know what you do, I don't know what that is, tell me more. Tell me more. People love talking about themselves. This is a nice, easy one that you can do. I'm new to this group. How long have you been a member? Simple question. Get someone talking. What brought you here to this conference, this event, anything like this? What did you think of the speaker? What did you learn about today? How do you know the speaker? If you notice, all of these are really easy questions. Someone's name tag, which I'm always a big fan, if you can, put the name of your name tag on there. I also say put Vista. Let me tell you, when I'm at events and I see someone has a Vista or the Vista shirt on, I'm like, oh, I'm a Vista alum, and I start chatting with them. So whenever you can, put the name of your organization and your Vista on there because it helps people. And then last but not least, hi, I'm this person. So if you notice, it's just simple questions. Things don't need to be complicated. I'm sure all of you, again, have some ideas for some really good questions that you've used for any of this. So put the questions out. But I always say, if you're working too hard, it's not working. So don't make it complicated. You don't need to understand what neurophysiology, biology, whatever is. You don't need to know all of that. You just say, so tell me what you do. Tell me more. The best conversationalists are talking little about themselves and asking lots of questions and simple questions. So when you're in this, and keep the questions coming, I just want to keep going so we have time for Q&A. We talked about smart meeting going. I talk about smart people thinking. Most importantly, be authentic. We've all been there with that person that we can tell is really kind of fake and putting on airs. Feels so uncomfortable. I also find, remember early on I said to be aware when you're going to events? If I was going to an event and I was like, wow, everybody's wearing suits or everybody's talking about stuff and it doesn't feel right to me, this is going to give me some clues. So the more authentic you can show up, I have a quote on my door. I love this Woodrow Wilson quote, and it says, do what you can with what you have where you are. So you might be newer in your career, or you might be later in your career having done this as a career changer and not know as much about it. Don't worry about it, finding commonalities. And commonalities might not be anything to do with work. Might be that you both, go to the same gym, that you both live in the same neighborhood. To help you with people thinking, one thing I always tell people, again, thinking about time, think about super connectors. People who have been in the organization for a long time, people who have been in the field a long time. When I've done a lot of my work in more rural communities, there's usually a couple people in the community that know everybody. Sometimes there are people who are journalists who kind of know the community. A lot of times they'll work at, I used to work at Boston Cares, a hands-on network organization. I knew hundreds of nonprofits when I lived in Boston. I guess in that capacity at that point, I might have been a super connector in that community. I'm not sure I would consider myself a super connector. I would consider myself a probably pretty good connector at that point. But there are people who have the perspective. So think about reaching out to them to connect, knowing that in those situations you might get less of those time because those people might be further up the profile, might be higher at the organization, have less time. They might also have more time because they have more people working for them and would love to help somebody younger or newer to a field. Again, think about adding value, whether it's, oh, I read about this book, I have tickets to this event, or as I was explaining earlier, connect other people to them, even if you don't have anything more value add. Sometimes it might be helping to volunteer for an event that they have. Talked about this before, thinking long-term and those board of advisors. So that's how you think about people. I would not suggest the first time you ask somebody you're having coffee with them, first of all, you never want to be asking them for a job on that first one, unless they specifically say, are you looking for work? You also never want to say, can you be my mentor? Can you be my board of advisors? You might say to them, it was really great connecting with you. Would you feel okay if every now and then I reached out? I would love to maybe have another coffee or stay in touch or ask questions. That helps them build a relationship. Going back to the first bullet on here, being authentic is what we're really all about. So we've got a few more slides and we're going to open up to Q&A. Smart meeting managing. So you've met these great people, you're trying to arrange these informational meetings, informational conversations with them. Keep your emails short and sweet, keep your meetings short and sweet. I tell people in that initial email that you're setting up with someone for a networking meeting, ask them for 15 to 20 minutes. People are much more inclined to say yes if you say 15 to 20 than if you don't say anything at all, because they're going to be afraid you're going to say yes. I have this happened to me just last year. I said yes to somebody, it wasn't even thinking, sent me a meeting invite for 1 hour meeting, didn't know this person. And then I felt awful because I had to write back and say, well, I really only have, at that point I said a half an hour, but I really only wanted to do 15, 20 minutes. I didn't know that person. If I connect with them and it's a great meeting, would love to have another one that's longer. Don't ask them what you can learn. I don't want somebody saying to me, oh, tell me about your career path, when you can look at that on LinkedIn. What is the Trachtenberg School about, when they can find that on the website? If someone has done their research on you, they might ask me, for example, oh, I saw you transition from working on a poverty initiative to running a career center. How did that transition happen? What skills did you need? So asking them questions that are value add. I've also had people do informational meetings with me where it's like 15 minutes in the meeting, they may have asked me one question, it's all about them. That does not build a relationship, and honestly made me feel like they were just using me. Have a hook, and what I mean by have a hook is have something interesting. You know, make sure you're not saying, oh, I just want to work in any nonprofit. Can you help me identify organizations? Well, if someone said that to me, I'm like, I don't know what I can do for you. But if they said, do you know any organizations that are working on early literacy, particularly I'm interested in reading programs, I could be like, oh, there's Reading Partners, there's Room to Read. Give them something specific. Follow up with an ask, whether it's you want to stay in touch with them, whether it's they used to work in an organization that you would love to have an informational interview with, whether there's someone else at their organization. Leave with the ask, and then create a system to track with them. I'm a big fan of using calendar reminders. Be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to remember that I want to connect with this person in 3 months. I put it on my calendar now. And then afterwards, whoops, sorry. You are not seeing double. There is a reason why there's 2 thank yous on there. So say I have had an informational meeting with Calvin. I send him an email thank you that night. Then maybe 2 to 3 days later, I send him a LinkedIn connection. He's asked me to connect with Joe Smith that he used to work with. So I set up a meeting with Joe Smith. I'm going to circle back to Calvin and say, Calvin, thank you again for connecting me to Joe Smith. He and I are meeting next week. After my meeting with Joe Smith, I want to send, actually, there should be a 3rd thank you on there. I want to send a 3rd thank you back to Calvin. Thank you so much. Joe was so helpful. I really appreciated this. Please let me know if there's ever anything I can do for you. I always end emails that way. Please let me know if there's ever anything I can do for you when I'm connecting it for networking, because it sets up a system of reciprocity. So by having that level of thank you with someone who I met with, not only is Calvin going to see that I'm really considerate and caring and I'm on top of things and I'm aware and I'm appreciative. And that's my general way of being. But by adding those additional touch points of the thank you before I meet with someone he referred me to and afterwards to let him know how it went, in that span of that 2, 3, 4 weeks, an opportunity might have come across his desk, someone else he might have met that would be relevant for me to talk with, that now I'm on his radar screen longer. So it helps me to stay more active in his mind so he can be like, oh my God, she just sent me the thank you. I just heard about this job. Let me send it her way. So I'm a really big fan of those thank yous because it helps ultimately with this. It always helps with sustaining the network of, you know, kind of building those things, sending congrats. I love LinkedIn for this. They'll be like, oh, so-and-so at a work anniversary, so-and-so published this. I use those all the time to just send quick thank yous to people. I don't spend much time on it, but I still do it. I'm a big fan. I love getting handwritten thank you notes. I get them every now and then for my students, and they are up on my bookshelf. I stare at them every day. We don't see enough of that. Contact for follow-up meetings, holiday notes. When you finish your year of national service and have a new job, send someone a note. You can't stay in touch with everybody all the time, so you want to think about the ones that have the most meaning, genuine connection for you to have that, you know, continuing. So it goes back to all of this around sustaining. So if you have some other ideas, so it's not just enough to like plant the seeds, but to sustain them, please put any suggestions in there. Would love to have any other ideas that you all have done that have worked. Again, I love hearing other people's ideas. And so then we're going back. We talked about this earlier. It's going back to reviewing this, assess, knowing yourself, knowing the community. It's going to help you be more authentic, be aware of yourself, be aware of the situation. You can read people when you're out that you can know, oh, you know, this organization's the right fit for me, or people seem to really want to connect with me. Talk with people, and by talk, ask great questions. Make sure you're doing things, going to places, expanding your network, educate yourself, and follow people. If you just kind of keep this going all the time, it's just going to help you. And again, I love my job. I'm not leaving my job. But I'm always building my network because who knows what kind of opportunities. I just had someone reach out to me to speak at a conference in Phoenix sometime in the late winter. Who doesn't want to go to Phoenix in late winter? Came through a network of someone that I don't even know that well. So those kind of opportunities. And also know this, it's not all going to feel comfortable. I've been doing this now, I've been in the field for 25 years. This is what I live and breathe. And you don't think I don't feel uncomfortable in plenty of situations? Feeling comfortable is not like the indicator that I know what I'm doing. I will feel uncomfortable, and it still means that I should go and do it. It just knows that it means that I have to do self-care to be doing it. I have to make sure, for example, I'm not really a suit person. So if I have to dress professionally, I make sure I'm wearing something professional that still feels like me, or that I'm going with a friend, or if I'm really proud of myself that I pushed myself to a new place or done something and talked to someone I wouldn't have really talked with, even though my stomach is in butterflies, I might reward myself afterwards, you know? So it's thinking about things that you can do to make sure you know that, because this is the truth. We feel safe. We feel safe staying in our communities. Building a network means getting out of this. But to do it, that's how we really sail. That's what we want to be doing. And for people who are doing national service, you all, I imagine every one of you on this call wants to make the world a better place. You can't make a better place if you're just really hunkered and anchored into this harbor. We want you to be out there, and I will tell you, in this world, we need more people that are willing to go out there and to sail their ships. And this is a major piece of it, whether it's about finding your next job, building a community of peers, get out there with your ship. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Calvin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all that wonderful information and for the lively chat. There has been a lot of great info floating around. We're almost to the Q&A portion of our webinar today, but I do, as I do on every webinar, would like to ask everyone what they thought of our presentation today. On the right side of your screen, you're going to find a quick poll where you can share some feedback about this webinar. So please take a moment to answer the questions. We really like to be able to improve these, and your input helps us so much. This poll will be up for the remainder of the presentation, so if you don't want to do it right this second, you'll have throughout the end. Again, we look at every single comment. I do personally, and I obsess over them, so please let us know what you thought. So let's take a second. Let's get to the Q&A portion of our webinar. I'm going to ask our operator to let us know how to ask questions via phone.
Thank you. And at this time, to ask a question, please press star followed by the number 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly at the prompt. To withdraw your request, please press star 2. One moment, please, for questions.
All right, thank you. And we'll check in on the phone in just a second. Again, reminder, if you have questions, don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track of them and keep track of what's been answered. So Denise, we have a few questions in here that I think are very interesting. So the first one kind of goes back to our discussion about LinkedIn. Bonnie says, I've joined a number of LinkedIn nonprofit groups, but the job positions haven't been that interesting to me, and they've kind of just been ghost towns in terms of connection. I know that the number of groups you can join is limited. How can I utilize them better?
That's great, and that is sometimes the case. There are some LinkedIn groups that I'm a part of that I just have connected off or not followed because they're not. One thing I would do when you do connection, well, a couple things is I like to use LinkedIn to do what I call career deconstruction. I will often, if there's someone when I'm working with a student who wants a certain job, we might look and see what their pathway is. If you see someone that's really active on LinkedIn, you see they have a lot of connections, look at their groups and see what groups they're a part of, because that can be a great source of ones that are more active. It's also a great question to ask people during networking meetings, like what LinkedIn groups are you a part of, so that way you're a part of those. I don't know, I think the limit for the number of groups in LinkedIn is really high. It used to be 50. I'm not sure if it's still that. Very rarely is someone a member of 50 groups. So I would look at the ones, join them, and then unjoin them if it's not as successful for you. Some people are really using them well. I can tell you this. LinkedIn recently went through a transition about a year ago. A lot of us were struggling with them and gave them a lot of feedback. I mentioned earlier that I got this email from them. I think the response I think at one point they weren't sure if they were keeping groups. I think the response that they got is people are using groups and need it to be more active, and so they're changing the way they're using groups, and that feeds are coming through. So I would suspect that people are going to be using their groups more actively again. So see what other people are recommending, and also be aware that there could hopefully be some more changes that increase to LinkedIn groups soon.
Yeah, totally. And I think my piece of advice on that is maybe be the catalyst, for those ghost town groups. Maybe make a post and say, hey, I noticed there hasn't been any activity lately. How's everyone doing? What's going on in this group? Anyone got any leads on anything? I think you're well within your right, to also be the person that steps up and maybe initiates that conversation. All right, so we have another question from Cassidy. She says, I'm always concerned about being a pest to people and connections by emailing too many times, and that includes thank yous. Any advice on this? How do you know when you're communicating too much, like over-communicating?
That's great. So one thing I always say to people is that if you're trying to connect with someone, I always suggest, as I said before, use LinkedIn to find them, but if you can email them through their professional email instead. It's always better that way. If you email them the first time and you don't hear back, I say wait 7 to 10 days. That feels nice. Send them an email back saying, I just wanted to send a quick follow-up on the email that I sent, on the 9th of January. Just wanted to see if there's a chance we can connect. If you don't hear back from them after a second email, I generally say, unless it's somebody really, really important, generally 2 emails. If someone emails me back and I haven't had a chance to get back to them and I still want to, I'll respond back at that point. Generally, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. The thank you emails, if they're kept short and they're just like a line or two, like I was suggesting, I don't think anybody's going to feel like it's a pest. Obviously, if I give you 8 names, you probably don't need to email me all of those every single one of those times. You might send me, an email that says, thank you again for connecting me with these 4 people. I'm actually following up with them soon. So, every couple weeks is a nice thing when you're doing those initial thank you emails. Then when you're staying in touch with them so you don't feel like it's a pest, one easy way to get away with that, to get around that, ask them. Say, maybe if I met with Calvin again, I might say, Calvin, I would love to stay in touch and ask questions. Is the best way of email? Is it okay if it's like every couple months? What works for you? And he might say, the next 6 months are really crazy for me, so maybe not until, the beginning of June, but then after that, I'm fine with every couple months. Ask them. Or just kind of every couple months, you touch base with somebody. You'll get a feel by how quickly they respond back to you and what they say in the responses. We've all gotten those emails back that we can tell the person's like, okay, I've got too much to do, or there's not really a value add, and they might, their email might be shorter. But again, don't totally judge it, and don't also think it's you. It probably has nothing to do with you. It might be other things going on in their life. So if you can, 7 to 10 days, send a follow-up. Ask them what the best way is to stay in touch.
Totally, great advice. We'll go to the phone and see if anyone's on the phone.
We are showing no questions at this time, but once again, *1 for your phone questions.
All right, cool. So we've got an easy one from Jasmine. I think this is easy. Should thank you letters be handwritten or mailed and delivered, or can they be sent via email?
So here's my feeling, is you can always send something via email. And I always tell somebody after an initial meeting with someone, preference is definitely for interviews. If you're doing an interview, that email needs to be out to everybody you interviewed with that night, or in their inbox by first thing in the morning. For informational meetings, You can sometimes, I prefer when someone sends an immediate thank you email. If not, it's okay within a couple days, or a handwritten one within a couple days. I would not wait longer than that. And it's really your call. Sometimes for regular interviews, not informational interviews, I tell people to both send a written email a written thank you via email that night as a thank you, and then for a couple of the lead people that are part of your actual interview process, send them an additional handwritten note that's much lighter and shorter. Just wanted to reiterate my interest. So either way, sometimes I'll just randomly get a thank you from somebody that will be, I didn't just meet with them, but I had met with them a while ago and my advice helped them with something with the job, and I'll get it via card, you know, in the mail. And I have to say, for me, I love that. I also hear from HR that they really notice those kinds of things. So use your judgment on what works for you. I don't think you're going to be disqualified or one way or the other from what you're doing, and one might make you a little bit more memorable for certain people.
Totally. And I think, too, like, I mean, any form of thank you note is better than no thank you note.
Yes, always.
All right, so we have a really interesting question from Alicia, which I have never thought of this, and I think this is great. So she says, the CEO and hiring manager at my dream job hasn't been taking me seriously. I'm friends with her mother, and I think that causes some issue. How do we draw the lines between personal and professional networking? Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, that's great.
That's a tricky situation.
It is a tricky situation, and my gut instinct when you're saying that, honestly, is that I would have a heart-to-heart with the person and say, you know, I love the friendship that I have with this person, but I really want to be taken seriously through this job and this work. What is your perception? How can we shift this relationship? Because it's hard. I mean, the other thing I would say is, just continuing to show up more and more in a professional way with that person. And when conversations might come up that are a little more personal, when you're in a professional setting, you might kind of say, you know what, I really want to focus on what we're working on right now. I would love to chat with you after hours. So for you to gradually begin to set some of those barriers.
Yeah, totally. Great answer. Thank you. Let's see, Gregory says, what about Career Builder and Indeed? And Gregory, I think those websites, those are more focused, on actually finding a job, I think, and there's less of a networking sort of focus on Career Builder and Indeed. They're both sort of, there to help you, help you get your resume out there, sort of browse for jobs, and there's less of that, like person-to-person connection. I think they're excellent resources for, trying to find a job and get a job. But as far as like networking goes, there's not a lot of like networking component there to either one of those.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and let's see, Erin says, how important is it to get on Twitter?
Here's my gut on that. I would say what I would do is I'm on Twitter, okay? I'm not very active on Twitter. Every now and then I post something. Every now and then I scroll stuff. I would still be on it, and you might find that there are just a couple of places that you really use it. I don't scroll through Twitter the way people do as a news feed. To me, it's overwhelming, and it's just not how I want to spend my time and my energy. But there might be certain organizations or certain groups that I do follow on there, and I might get every now and then a Twitter alert with it. It is important to just have that presence if someone asks you, particularly depending on the line of work that you want to be in nonprofits. Like if you're going to be in the communication side of things, even if you're in like volunteer engagement, they might want to know that you're active on social media. Other people who are really big Twitter fans might give some other advice about the huge value of Twitter for certain areas. It's not one that I use, to be honest, incredibly regularly, just because I'm not a big social media person. But others, I'm not sure, Calvin, your view on Twitter. I mean, that's just my own take on Twitter, that it has a value, maybe a selective value with certain organizations. It's not like it's like LinkedIn, where if you're not on LinkedIn, it raises a huge red flag.
Yeah, totally. I think it just depends on like the field that you're going into and sort of what your intention is. You know, if you are really trying to like create like a personal brand and kind of curate, you know, a certain aesthetic, a certain look, and a certain like vibe for yourself, I think then like Twitter is probably I think it's essential, you know, to expand your sort of base and like the more outlets that you have for your personal sort of brand, like the better. But if you are, you know, maybe just interested in like keeping up with news or keeping up, you know, with tweets from like your favorite organizations, and maybe it's like less important, and you can like find a different way to get that information. I have a Twitter account, same. I don't really use it much because I also find it to be a little overwhelming, and I have like, there's other things that I like to get the information that I need from that. But I think again, I think it just depends, you know, on your intention and really what you're going for. If you're trying to, you know, get aggressive about, you know, about networking and really like putting yourself out there as broadly and widely as possible, then I would say for sure like look into it. But if you're, you know, okay, sort of being a little more low-key about your networking and maybe sticking to like LinkedIn and maybe, you know, maybe one or two other platforms, I think it's just going to be, you know, like which ones work best for you.
Yeah, and just the one thing, this is a little bit off from this, but I think it is important to know. So I study positive psychology. I study and I teach this here at GW as part of my work. And there's a lot of really interesting research around information overload, and particularly negative information overload. And no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, I think this year has really exacerbated that. Again, no matter what your party is, no matter what your political stance is. And I find a lot of people have a need that they're like, oh, I have to be looking at my Twitter feed every day. I have to know what's going on in the world. I would encourage you to really think about, is that adding to, you know, your productivity, how you feel about the world? There's a significant amount of research in the positive psychology world that even it's like, I can't remember if it's like 3 or 5 minutes of negative news in the morning, people significantly rate their day at the end of the day as being a less happy, less positive day. So just really think about, if you're on some of this social media for building your network and all that, what you're getting through your feed in terms of selective information, so that way you are not, there isn't, you know what is important for you to know, and you're not being caught into this world of this news cycle where you feel like you have to know everything, because this really does affect your overall well-being, your overall ability to flourish, and the overall well-being in your work.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to check in on the phone again to see if we have anyone that has called in with a question.
We are showing no questions at this time.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. We'll check in probably one more time before we close out. We've got about 20 minutes left and a few more questions in the queue.
Great.
So let's see. Bonnie says, she's another LinkedIn question. I think I understand this, Bonnie, but we may need a little more detail. She says, all the searches on my profile are from businesses and software companies. What kind of SEO optimization do I need to do to improve results? That sounds like a very technical question.
No, that's really great. So a couple things that you want to do. One, and I have my computer right now, so I'm opening up my profile right now, so I'm looking at this to make sure I'm getting you the right information, is a couple things. One, really personalize. Make sure that not just the header underneath your name, but your profile has the keywords. Now, I'm not sure if it changed when LinkedIn evolved, but recruiters, for example, can read the first 50, it used to be the first 50 characters of your header under your name and the first 100 characters of your summary statement, so that adds to it. But really use in your summary statement, use words about what you want to be doing. Again, if maybe your past was in that line of work you talked about, but you want to go into something else, make sure it should be an objective statement, but it should certainly talk about the work that you're interested in. A tip with writing your professional profile on, this is true of resumes and LinkedIn, again, when I talked about this, using LinkedIn for career deconstruction, find people who have great profiles. Look at the language. You don't want to be, copying them word for word, but get ideas from things from other people's profiles. Also, underneath each of your jobs, make sure in your experience, if you have some jobs on there that are not relevant for where you want to go, take them off, or don't have anything written about them in the description, and then the ones like your Vista service, add more information so you're getting more keywords. So that's one big way to really do that. Also, if you click on LinkedIn under jobs, you can actually go and it says update career interests. You can see that. You can turn that on. There's a click that says let recruiters know you're open. Click that on. you can actually click. It says what job titles are you considering, what locations, what types of jobs, what industries. So you can add more information in that to help get better jobs sent to you. And also make sure you're setting up a job search agent in the jobs, because it's going to help you. You can put in the parameters, and that's going to help them find the better jobs that are relevant for you.
Great, thank you. Excellent answer. All right, so Abby says, what is the best way to list your VISTA service on your resume and LinkedIn? And Abby, I'll tell you that we do have tons of resources on the VISTA campus about, translating your VISTA service to your resume. We actually have an entire webinar that's recorded just on that topic. But I would say, from my experience, it's, talk about it like it is a job. I mean, you are doing really like things that are quantifiable. You're able to speak about the number of volunteers that you recruited, the amount of grant dollars that you've raised, and all that stuff. So, I mean, I think there's an opportunity there, to really really brag on yourself. I mean, it is a year. It's only 1 year, so you're really going to have to, like contextualize like everything that you've done in that year. And then I think someone asked, should you put your VISTA service under work experience and general experience or volunteer experience?
Work.
Work for sure. Yeah, that's what I said. Work definitely.
Experience. Yeah, definitely under professional experience. And just what I suggest people do is you put the name of the organization and then you say as your role, AmeriCorps Vista, where you might say AmeriCorps Vista, Programs Department, Volunteer Management for AmeriCorps Vista. Yeah, you absolutely want to put it on there.
Totally.
People know it, and I think I might have even have done for the corporation a whole workshop. I think you might have a webinar even that I did on resumes. I'm not sure.
I think
it might be older.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be an older one, but there's I have a whole thing with lots of different examples about resumes.
Totally. Let's see. Ariana says, I've had someone prep me for an interview at a job that he worked at. I let my nerves get the best of me and did terrible during the interview. The person who prepped me no longer seems interested, and knowing me, how can I refresh this connection?
So this is, again, I would name the elephant in the room. And I would go back to the person and say, I really respect you and I really appreciate how you helped me with X, Y, and Z. I want to be honest with you. I was really nervous in this interview, and I did not do well. I really, I'm not sure, you could say something like, I know that this was absolutely not a reflection of the support that you had given me. I would love to still stay in touch and reconnect. Would you be open to that? I'm really a big fan of naming the elephant in the room and making sure it's there. To be honest with you, it might not have anything to do with you why the person hasn't been as active. It might be because of that, but it might not. But our first gut instinct is always, remember going back to the neuroscience and why our brains are wired? It's that thing about the community of what happened to us and we're feeling rejected, so we often tell these stories. But name the elephant in the room. If you don't get a good response from the person, you just need to move on. Maybe they'll eventually come back. But I say put it out there.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm always a big fan, when you do interviews, when you do anything in life, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And actually research shows that when someone has a little bit of a misstep in an interview and recovers well, the interviewers actually view them as more likable than someone that's perfect. So don't berate yourself if you mess up on an interview. The true character of people is not whether or not you make a mistake or not. The true character of people is how you handle things. And this is true in your job. We all make mistakes in our job. We all make mistakes in life, or in an interview. If you've gone in the wrong direction, to say to someone, you know what, I don't think I answered the question well. Can I restart? Can I, share a little bit more with stuff? You're showing your character, and remember, a big part of the interview is looking at fit, and to me, that would say a lot about you as fit. So if you do make a little misstep in an interview, instead of going down in a more negative space, say, oh, now they get to see me as more likable and relatable. This is great. Let me recover from there, and you could land on a high note.
Yeah, great. So we have a question from Ariel. It says, if you talk to a group of people at once, should you send individual thank you emails to each?
If you're doing an informational meeting, absolutely. I'm always a big fan of sending individuals because then they have your individual connection, and whenever possible, even if you're talking to a group of people, someone, there's personal information that someone will share. During the meeting, someone might have said something specific, and you're like, oh, I really appreciated when you shared this story or that you asked me this question. So I'm a big fan of that. That is absolutely true of regular interviews. If you're interviewing with a group, I mean, when I interviewed for my job here at the Trachtenberg School, I had an all-day interview. That night, I was sending out emails. I think I probably sent out emails to about 25 people because I had student interviews. Everybody got an individual email, and then the director and associate director, in addition to their individual email, got handwritten emails. I think it says a lot about the character of someone that they're willing to do that. So I don't think you're ever going to go wrong doing more.
Definitely, and I think that, it shows the fact that you would spend the time to do that is also an indicator that, hey, this person's actually very interested, they want this. It shows some dedication, to keeping that connection alive, the fact that you take time out to follow up in that way.
Relationships are everything. I always say relationships are the true currency in the public service space, and authentic relationships. So the more you can help build that authenticity, which means that even when you're newer in a field, saying to someone, I don't actually understand what you've just said. I don't know what your organization does. Instead of trying to pretend to know somebody or know everything, people really respect that authenticity, and that helps build a relationship that could last as you go into the field and really, expand your community.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's see, we've got just 4 more questions, and then I think we'll be done with our webinar today. So Rachel says, I deactivated my Twitter when I started my service term because of previous work on a political campaign. Can I reopen my account as is, or should I scrub my account before reactivating? Rachel, I think the reason you're asking this question is because of the Hatch Act and sort of our laws around what you can and cannot do as a VISTA member. As long as you're engaged in those activities during your service, you should be okay. I would definitely check in with your CSO, with your corporation state office, to just say, hey, I've opened this back up if you want to. You're definitely within your purview to even, you can shoot an email to your state office and say, hey, this is my account, this is my issue, do you guys see any issue with this? And they can sort of guide you and let you know, yeah, I would take this off, or no, you're okay. Yeah. And let's see, this is a great question from Maritha Best. She said, I'm older, retired from the Air Force. I have a BS in IT management, and I've worked at the library until they no longer called me in for work. Now I'm at Habitat for Humanity. How can I connect in this rural area where many of the older citizens do not use social media or email?
You want to have time with them. Go to community events. I'm a big, big fan. Go to community events. I know it sounds cliche, but is there a community bingo? Is there, a community park event, a block event? Organize something. Right now, for example, there's these things called the people suppers. I knew people in my area went to this dinner recently where actually it's really interesting. It was the woman and the man met through professional, and they are, I think that's a 25, 30-year difference in the two. One's younger, one's older, and they really felt like there wasn't enough space for people from all different ages and walks of life. And every couple of weeks, they host this dinner together. I think you pay $25. I can't remember what it was. And it was a wonderful, creative idea to have in-person opportunities. So I would think about, as I said, when I was in Maine, a lot of my vistas were in Maine, and we were all over the areas. It might be a lobster bake in Maine. It might be something outdoorsy. But as much as you can do through in-person, meeting people where they are.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it, is go where the people are, meet them where they're at. If they're not on social media, I mean, you'll probably have to, go out into the community, if that's an American Legion, or a VFW or something like that, especially, for older Americans. And if you're in a rural community, where there aren't these services, then again, maybe it's up to you to create them and create those spaces for people to organize and get together. That could be a really fun, project. All right, so Benet says, how often should you meet with someone, and how long should you keep the networking going? That's a good
So
question.
to me, you mean like overall your network is forever. I mean, you know, I have people I've built relationships with, you know, for many, many, many years. And actually, I'm going to tell a story in just a second. But how often you should connect? I think was that the first part of the question, Calvin?
Yeah, it's how often should you meet with someone? So I guess, you know.
Again, going back to that thing of asking the person and saying, you know, can we get coffee every several months? Someone might say, like, I have a lot of people that like to reach out to me personally just because of my line of work and so many students. So I probably wouldn't want to meet with someone every couple months unless I'm really close with them, but it might be every 6 months, but they might be able to send me an email reaching out to me and saying, you know, can I get some advice on this? And, you know, again, it's how things are worded. I'll use as an example. So I volunteered the other day with a group doing assistance for asylum seekers, immigrants in the D.C. area. One of the volunteers there is looking for a job and wrote me a very nice email afterwards. Would you mind if I asked you a couple questions in the next couple of weeks as things go on? It was very time limited. It was very respectful. That to me felt good. Again, he was giving me what I tell people whenever you're doing an ask, word it so it's so easy for someone to say yes or so easy for someone to say no and maintain the relationship. So the way it was worded, would it be okay, would you feel comfortable, you know, if I reached out to you with these questions over the next couple months? Would it be okay if I reached out to you in 2 months to see if we could have another coffee, you know, early in the spring? That way, if the person's really busy, they can say, no, actually my schedule doesn't really allow it, but you've worded in a way where they still want to work with you, or you make them excited for them to say yes. Again, it's always about those relationships. And again, when we say about how long to be doing this for, the example I always like to give is someone who works at the Corporation for National Community Service. I met her at a conference probably 7 years ago because CNCS had free beignets at a conference in New Orleans for Vista alum. She's now a friend, a colleague. That's how I actually got connected originally, with starting to do a lot of these trainings with CNCS. So you never know how these things unfold, in what ways and to what length of time. There are other people who I've connected with who those networks have kind of faded down. Some of them have faded to zero, some are maybe a 1 or a 2, and other ones stay more active. And I always think about it kind of as that radio dial of the dimmer. You know, how high or how low you want that music to sound is going to depend on different parts of your life.
Definitely. So we have just a couple more questions to get through. So Tammy says, so what are some suggestions that you may have in understanding when people are more comfortable using technology as a means of communication and when they are not, without saying or without asking them? And Tammy, my initial response is just to ask them. I'm not sure what the hesitation would be, you know, in skirting around the issue of saying, hey, you know, what is the best way of contacting you? I think some cues that you could probably pick up on are, you know, if someone gives you a phone number and says, you know, give me a call sometime, saying give me a call sometime is indicating probably like that's the way that they're most comfortable communicating. If they give you their email first, you know, maybe that is their preferred, you know, way of communicating. But I think you should just, you know, flat out ask them, you know, how comfortable are you with technology, or maybe phrase it differently and just say, you know, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Yes, I would prefer. I think that way is the best way, Calvin, to just say, you know, what's your preferred mode of communication? You know, like for me professionally, I don't like to text people just because I think professionally I'd rather do an email. But just to ask somebody, what's your preferred mode? And they might say, you know what, I actually don't really like to use social media. Why don't you come in for a meeting? Let them take the lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so Bethany says, would you recommend publishing articles in your LinkedIn? If so, how often? And I would say yes, for sure, especially if you're the one writing them and they're relevant to your interests and to the career fields that you're going into. I read something recently that said, you know, people who publish original content on LinkedIn get seen, I mean, like it was a really big number, you know, like exponentially more than people who don't publish or even share articles that are relevant. I would say, again, make sure that they're relevant, you know, to your interest in the conversation. I've seen people, you know, kind of post things that are overly political and kind of skew the conversation. I've seen, you know, a lot of comments on LinkedIn that say, you know, I come here to network for business, not to kind of get pulled into, like, you know, politicized comments. So I think, like, just being mindful of like what you're posting and what you're publishing and sort of your intention and kind of knowing who your audience is on that one.
I think you're absolutely right. And the thing I would say is we all know there's people in our lives that are constantly tweeting, constantly putting Facebook, constantly putting LinkedIn, and it makes me feel like, what are they trying to prove? So just kind of use that as a gauge, you know, of the selective posting and making sure that you're sending. Again, it's always about what's the story you want to be telling about yourself. For some people who are really, really busy on social media and that's part of their job, it's nothing to do with what they want to prove. It's just that's what they're doing in their work, and that's great. It's, again, what is the story that you want people to be seeing about you?
Yeah. All right, cool. So let's see. Ariana says, Denise, that you may have mentioned in passing an AmeriCorps League, some sort of league in your presentation, like a DC league. She asked that I re-ask for you.
I remember there's a big softball, intramural softball in DC, and there was, I don't know if it still is. I'm a horrible softball player, so I stopped playing. And there was a National Service Softball League. So if you look at the DC Softball League, I'm sure other cities have them too. It was fun here because we would play on the mall. I don't know if they let you play on the mall anymore, but it was fun. Before then, I realized that I was more of a liability to the team than an asset.
For sure, yeah. I haven't heard of one, but if you do find it, please send it my way because I would like to be a teammate maybe.
Maybe you're better than I am.
Yeah.
I was a great cheerleader.
Yeah, same. And then we've got one more that just came in. I think this is a pretty easy one. From Leah Jean, she says, in your opinions, what is the main difference between networking and your, quote, network? I think that, to me, the act of networking is the process of building your, like, capital N and network. That's a tricky question. I don't know. That's
I mean, we use the word networking. I will be honest, I wish I never had to use the word networking. I don't really love it. I actually don't really love it. To me, it's always, and even building, it's more building your network, and it's the act of networking is, to me, what I would rather it to be thought of as. It's the act of building. It's the process. It's an organic way to connect with people, whether through reading about them and learning about an organization, whether through following people online and connecting online, in person. It's the process of building and connecting with a place, coming from a place of authenticity, curiosity, and openness to get to know other people who care about things that you care about. And who, remember I talked about that care share. That you're building that. That is what it is. This is career capital, long-term capital around your purpose and meaning. To me, this is really about purpose and meaning and connecting with people who share that and that you feel that connection in that way. So in an ideal world, that would be the language that I would do. Yes, people will say, oh, this is a networking event. You are going to network, so you're still going to hear that. And that's, to me, what the difference is.
Totally. And on that note, Denise, you got any final closing words for everyone?
It's really just what I said, is really come at this from a place of genuine curiosity and learning and thinking about who do I want to be in this world, who do I want to connect with, and how do I want to make that impact, and what do I need to do to make that happen from a place of, I've said this, I keep saying it, authenticity. Authenticity, curiosity, connection. And I feel like if you approach it from that place, it's going to feel more comfortable, it's going to feel more at ease, it's going to feel more natural, and it's going to have the most impact.
Definitely. And with that, we will leave everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This has been a really rich conversation, and I've really appreciate all the questions, and the chat has been lively. I think we all got something out of today's presentation. If you are interested, please join us for our next webinar, which is going to be on March 28th, and it's going to be on January 30th, and it's 5 steps to assessing community needs. We'll be sending out an email with a link to register for that in the coming weeks if we haven't already. And if you have any further questions or need any additional clarification or follow-up on this topic, you can email us at vistatrainingsupport@cns.gov, and I'll go ahead, it's on the slide, and I'll pop that into the chat box, and you can email us, and we'll get back to you. So thanks everyone so much, and thank you so much, Denise, for joining us today.
Thank you.